Hi there. Welcome to 350 Bay Area's Energy Equity Education Campaign Series. We are bringing people up to speed on the issues with the for-profit utilities and how they work with and overly influence the regulatory and electoral process. And our campaign is intended to counter that power with people power. And so we are trying to get people up to speed on the issues. We are starting with general overviews. And the answer to once you get into the weeds is always, it's complicated, but we're trying to simplify it so that we can all be effective spokespeople as we talk to our elected officials and to each other and try to build support for taking on the utilities that have way too much power. So we've already done a couple of, multitasking here. We've done a couple of webinars in this series, and we have a great YouTube channel. 350 Bay Area and 350 Bay Area Action both have good YouTube channels. And the previous webinars in this series are, I just put the link to that in the chat, and I, of course, highly recommend them. So hang on a sec. I am so excited to introduce you all to Claire Broome, who has been working with 350 Bay Area for many, many years now, going deep into the weeds. She knows what complicated means and is a delight to work with. So Dr. Claire Broome spent 28 years at the small organization called the Centers for Disease Control, and initially as an epidemiologist responsible for preventing bacterial meningitis and pneumonia. And she served as deputy director of the CDC from 1994 to 1999, and led the development of a web-based transformation of the organization's disease monitoring systems. So Claire's really quite knowledgeable about data and how it's used in industry and to make decisions. So for the last 17 years, she has been working to accelerate the progress towards clean energy, especially in California. So I'm thrilled to turn it over to Claire, who, like I said, is so much fun to work with.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for that gracious introduction, but even more for the leadership of 350 Bay Area. You know, what we're going to talk about today is DER, which is great jargon. And we'll try to demystify it and give you an overview of why it is so important to meeting our climate goals and also reducing the California electricity cost crisis. And I hope I will convince you that DER is a substantial part of the answer to both of those critically important issues. So distributed energy resources is a really good example of what we're trying to do. The term itself, people who have worked in this area for ages tend to think that distributed energy resources means rooftop solar. No, that is only one of the suite of tools that distributed energy resources provides us for saving money and for accelerating meeting the climate crisis. So we'll start out with, so what are distributed energy resources? So traditionally, the power system was organized as a centralized model where the utilities provided the poles and wires to bring energy in from, either gas generating plants or, in our case, large solar installations, frequently in the desert or in remote out areas. And what we're in the middle of is a really exciting transition away from that kind of top-down centralized model of generating power to the ability to generate and store power locally, near where we live, near where the energy is used. In this case, the the distribution grid operated by a distribution services operator. I've borrowed a couple of slides from the other presentation in this series on Utilities 101 and the Public Utility Commission. And I really recommend it as a great primer on the details of the grid. But this is the high-level view of why are we focusing on the distributed energy resources. First, and here are the take-homes. If you get nothing else from today's talk, remember these. It's a faster way to get to the clean grid. If you're building transmission, that literally can take 10 years from when you decide you need it to when it's actually in operation. It's substantially cheaper, and I'll go into that in some detail. And as we know, already we're spending an enormous amount of money for electricity in California. It's resilient. 90% of our power outages happen on the distribution grid in the local area. And if you have solar and storage, either in your home or in a community resilience center, then you can ride through a power outage with no problem. I've experienced that myself since PG&E turns the power off regularly. In addition to that, when you build on the distribution grid, you're providing local jobs and the potential for local distribution decision-making. So it's a democratization of our power system rather than handing it over to the for-profit utilities. So those are the take-homes, and we're going to go under the surface a little further on most of these. And also, we are planning to leave plenty of time for questions. And you can put your questions in the chat at any time. And somebody else will be managing the chat and getting to the questions that we can go into in more depth at that time. So just a little more detail on what do we mean by the centralized model. And in this slide, again, from the presentation on Utilities 101, it's called the bulk system because these are generally larger resources, but they also require transmission. So you're generating out here and you're sending it to the local distribution grid. And here's where we start getting a little further down in the weeds about what are DERs. So they're resources owned by individual residential customers. It could be rooftop solar. It could be a home battery. It also could be your heat pump heating system. It could be your electric vehicle. Both of those can serve as batteries. It also includes larger, like warehouses, commercial, municipal customers, government buildings. So all of those can also be part of a DER network. Smart buildings, that's a large office building, for example, in which you have controls to adjust energy use. And we'll talk more about what that means. It can be microgrids. Some people think, oh, DERs mean microgrids. That's not true. But microgrids can be an essential component of DERs, and we can talk more about that if people want to. Finally, I want to highlight this because it's a missing part of California's energy ecology. What I've discussed so far, like in a home or in a building, are what's called behind the meter, because it's an individual building where your everything is happening within that single unit, meter controlled. But there's also a lot of room on the distribution grid to have larger installations. For example, on a big box store, on a warehouse, on a brownfield. And that can benefit, that can be generation for the whole community. So people who don't have room on their rooftops for solar can benefit from a local solar. And all of these, they can generate and they can store without using the transmission system. This is all within the local distribution area. And I want to emphasize this highlighted part of the slide, the graphic. Local DER can supply a major share of new electrification demand. as we move forward with electrifying our cars, getting electric space heating, heat pumps in our buildings, we are going to need a lot more energy for total usage. That's not even without even considering data centers. So we are looking at a major increased need for electricity. But with DERs, we can do that at a much lower cost. And I'll show you some numbers when we get there. So I think there's one more very important DER I'll tell you about on a subsequent slide, demand flexibility. But this gives you the range of what is included in the term DERs. And I guess I also should credit energy efficiency. So when you insulate your house well or use efficient light bulbs, you're consuming less electricity. So that's also a benefit to the system. So I'm going to skip that one and go ahead to this. And this one, people's eyes glaze over when they see this figure. But I think it's worth looking at in detail because this really shows you one of the biggest energy and money saving opportunities with DER. So what you're looking at here is a hot summer day in California. And if you go along the base, you're starting at midnight and you're going through the entire day and the evening. And this, the black line at the top, looks at the total energy usage. What times do people really need energy? Big surprise, in the middle of the night, not so much. The total maximum peak is still in the late afternoon hours. So 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., if I'm reading this correctly. However, and then it starts dropping off, and it's still pretty high during the evening hours when people come home and, cook and turn on their electronics. So it stays high. There's sort of a shoulder at 9, and then it falls and goes down to the nighttime low. So that's what electricity use looks like. This big white area is what rooftop solar, what DERs are currently producing. And that means that demand for energy is taken care of. You don't need to get this energy from the grid. So basically, this line down here after the rooftop solar is what needs to be supplied by the distribution grid and the transmission grid. Now, I'm sure you've heard that, oh, the peak demand is from, 6 to 9 p.m., and that's when electricity is most expensive. The reason for that is grid level solar, which is the yellow portion of this figure. And California has done great on both rooftop solar and on grid solar. So we are meeting a huge amount of our demand for power, for energy from renewable solar. And so much so that the demand from gas generating, which is the gray part at the bottom, is much lower than it would be if we didn't have all of that grid solar. But solar goes away, as we all know, when the sun goes down. So our big challenge for getting rid of gas generation and fossil fuel is figuring out how we're going to cover that demand for electricity between 6 and 9 p.m. Now, the other exciting part of this is the orange section, and that's what batteries are taking care of. So the orange part is grid level batteries, and the little dotted line is so far what's happening with customer batteries. But customer batteries are in the early days. But you can see what a big chunk that has become for this evening peak. So the other major information that I'd like to share with you is overall, you have a grid that is built so that when you turn on the light switch, the power comes on. Over the whole 24 hours, only about 45% of grid capacity is used. There's huge amounts of excess capacity at most hours. You have to build, however, the capacity to handle this peak demand. People want their electric stove to turn on when they want to cook dinner. So in fact, the grid is essentially overbuilt to meet this net peak at 6 to 9 p.m. If you have a battery, your home battery, for example, you can charge it from your rooftop solar. So it's not drawing energy from the grid. And then you can use it to power your home during this net peak. That saves you money because you're not buying expensive electricity. But it also provides a way that we don't have to build. If we decrease that peak load, we decrease the amount of grid infrastructure that needs to be built. Similarly, if you come home with your electric vehicle, if you plug it in as soon as you get home, you will create more peak load, and that's a problem for the grid. If you plug it in to charge in the middle of the night, you are not putting that kind of burden on the grid capacity. So basically, what we're saying is that one of the huge ways DERs save money is by shifting peak load, by shifting electricity demand out of the peak period. And that's called demand flexibility. And it is one of the major ways in which DERs can save us all money. So here's another way to look at this. So battery storage is getting cheaper, dramatically cheaper. It's also getting safer. You all have probably heard about the Moss Fire's Landing battery fire, which was horrible. It was an earlier generation battery, which is really no longer used. And it was configured in a way that we no longer use. So we have to pay attention to battery safety, but Moss Landing is not, that was 1.0. And then most importantly, everything can be a battery of what we're talking about, the water heaters, the space heating and air conditioning with a heat pump, and EVs. That's my favorite. It's the batteries on wheels. And in fact, you get far more energy from a car battery than you get from a wall battery. So EVs are an enormous resource as part of the DER suite. Now, this all does take some orchestration and some changing behavior. You need to plug in your car so that it charges at night. You don't have to plug it in. You just have to set it to charge at night, or during the middle of the day is the best. But there are a lot of programs where you can get paid for shifting, for the demand flexibility, for shifting your use away from peak periods or away from periods when the grid is stressed, like an afternoon in September when we've had brownouts. It also works best when it is automated, either by how you set your charging or how you have your thermostat set. So we're not suggesting that everybody has to spend their time looking at, the KISO monitor for when you should change your use of electricity. And there's a lot of technology that makes that very easy. So don't look at these slides because we can go back to them if you want to. But the big question is, so why is it that everybody isn't pushing DERs? And specifically, why are the for-profit utilities blocking DERs? As I mentioned before, the DERs make it easy to invest in less transmission. But the for-profit utilities make an 8 to 10% return for every dollar they invest in transmission or they invest in upgrading the distribution grid. So the incentives in the system are to build more transmission, to build more remote energy, and to, in fact, as we've seen, put obstacles in the way of DER. I think as I've mentioned, we all know cost of electricity is accelerating in California way above the rate of inflation. And that increase is being driven by the utility spending on transmission and distribution. It's also a problem because the utilities have orchestrated a campaign to blame rooftop solar as the cause for the acceleration in electricity prices. I would strongly recommend the webinar on the 350 Bay Area YouTube page on the cost shift. The Solar Rights Alliance does a wonderful job of documenting that this is disinformation. So we can get back to the issue of what's driving utility rates in California, but there are resources to really get, so you can do a deep dive into this disinformation campaign, which has been appallingly effective. Your legislators almost certainly have heard about and are concerned about the cost shift. You need to educate them about how DERs can solve the problem. They're not the problem. So this is interesting. A couple of slides that I put in don't seem to be here, Laura. We must have an earlier version of the Google thing. So I'll try to wing it. This gives you the links, and I think Laura's already put them in the chat, on the resources that are available through the 350 Bay Area website. So what can we do about all this? Let me just give you a couple of for instances, and then Laura's going to ask me questions about stuff that wasn't clear or that I didn't cover, and then we'll open it to Q&A from the chat. So what can we do? I mean, one of the first things is being here today and learning about what's driving the electricity cost crisis and how DER and network community power can really help control those costs. Your own individual investments and choices, and also what your community choice aggregators do, can really help. The more people invest in solar storage, energy efficiency, demand flexibility programs, the better. This is on the policy level, but DER need to get fair compensation. Remember I told you how useful they were for resilience? And I can tell you from my experience, it is so great when PG&E turns off the power for fire safety and my power doesn't turn off. The PUC gives absolutely no value to that resilience, even though for me, and I suspect for you, having that resilience is a major benefit. And then, of course, we need all of you to be effective advocates with your friends, with your neighbors, with your legislators. We desperately need regulatory reform, legislation, and exploring new models that really put the focus on the distribution grid, that we get as much energy generated and stored locally before. We will need transmission. We will need remote resources. But first, we should be investing locally. So I'm going to stop talking. And Laura, take it over.
So this is a little bit in the weeds, but maybe you can like not go so deep for those of us who are neophytes here. When you talk about accounting for benefits of all of these different DER resources, can you just give us a little 10-sentence summary of what's going wrong with those models and why they're insufficient and captured?
That's a great question, because these are down in the weeds, and I will not give you the painful details. But some of the people speaking for the for-profit utilities will say, oh, we use the PUC's avoided cost calculator. So we have included accurate accounting for the benefits of DER. Well, that's simply not true. This is the kind of calculations the PUC has to make to say what's the most cost-effective, the cheapest way to get the energy we need. So they do very complex quantitative analyses. But they do not include benefits, any benefit for resilience on the distribution grid. And 90+% of outages are on the distribution grid. They inadequately, so there's some consideration of avoided transmission, but it's only transmission which has actually been planned. So the value they have in there for DER is way too low. Just to give you the magnitude, back in 2017, the transmission operator canceled $2.6 billion worth of planned transmission because of energy efficiency and rooftop solar. So they thought all of this demand for remote power was going to come, but it didn't. So they actually, DER actually saved the people of California $2.6 billion, which is real money. They also, this whole issue of how much distribution grid do you need to build, it takes enormous, complicated planning. But that planning needs to incorporate the potential for all of us to choose to shift load for that demand flexibility. For example, the Public Advocate's Office, which is has not been a friend to DER, but when they looked at how much it was going to cost to support all this increasing demand for electricity, they discovered that if people managed their EV charging, if they charged away from the peak period, it would save $35 billion by 2035. So we're talking big dollars that can be saved with DERs, and they're simply not included in the current avoided cost calculator or other cost effectiveness analyses that the PUC does. Oh, can I say something about the TAC?
Everybody prepare to fall into a coma. Go ahead.
But this is why we're
Transmission
having
access charge.
this
Yep.
is why we're having this discussion, because the stuff is so complicated. Everybody's eyes glaze over and they just say, whatever. So as we've discussed, a huge portion of your bill is paying for transmission. And that's one of the most rapidly accelerating parts of your bill. And as I told you, DER, the whole point is they don't need transmission. You just share your energy from your rooftop with your neighbors, or you get the brownfields generation sent to the apartment buildings. However, if you are in a for-profit utility territory, including CCAs, if you look at your bill, which you should not do because it hurts, you will discover something called the transmission access charge. And for every kilowatt hour of electricity that you use, you will be charged between 3 and 7 cents, which is a pretty substantial portion of your bill, even if you are getting that electricity from the brownfields across the city. So that's not how it's done in municipal utilities that are not for profit. They pay transmission charges only on the energy that comes in from the transmission system. So the for-profit utilities have basically forced everybody to pay transmission access charges, even if the energy you're using does not use the transmission system. So that's way down in the weeds, but it's something that the legislature could fix.
So there's another sneaky in the weeds thing that you and I have talked about and wrote an op-ed about. And I think it's sort of speaking to this like insatiable profit appetite by folks like PG&E. Will you talk about the little 1 or 2 sentences that was snuck into a 120-page, I'm probably exaggerating, rulemaking? Just super briefly, just so people have a sense.
You mean in terms of like the planning for
Yeah.
electrification? Yeah, this is pretty stunning and depressing. Sorry, people. We'll end on a positive note, right, Laura? But so as I told you, the Public Advocate's Office estimated that just managed charging could save 35 billion. the that's based on a study that was funded by your rate dollars, which was designed to estimate how much is this electrification going to cost? How much are we going to have to invest in the grid if we don't use DERs? And an independent, really good consulting firm estimated that it would be $51 billion through 2035 to meet the electrification needs for improving the grid infrastructure. That was phase one. And it was designed to be, what's the worst case scenario here? So they finished phase one, and the intention was to go to a phase two where you could look at how well you could plan and avoid some of that investment through DERs, through demand flexibility, through locationally targeted investments. And that was going to be phase two. So the PUC, without public consultation, told the for-profit utilities that they should do phase two. They should figure out how to do this electrification transition in ways that would benefit the public.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is asking the fox to design the hen house. So let me try to, I'm going to throw you a huge question. We'll see what you do there. So as we, regulatory reform is hard. It sounds like it's going to have to be, that's going to have to come from legislation. And, you know, maybe that there's a ballot measure that can like push the, I don't know. How are you thinking about how we're going to get to the kind of regulatory reform that we're looking for? And maybe there are other states that have done interesting things, or, you know, kind of where are we in the world, and
yeah,
how do we get where we want to go?
that's a great question. And, you know, California likes to pat itself on the back for being so progressive and a leader for renewable energy. And in many ways, we are. In terms of DER, we are not. New York and Massachusetts are substantially ahead of us. Like New York State has a plan that fairly compensates DERs. So, and that is way down in the weeds. And there are, so just to get to your question, there are a number of groups that are exploring different possibilities. And I think right now we need to look at all of them. So it could just be changing the incentives for the utilities. Instead of rewarding them for building more than they need to, you could do what's called performance-based regulation, where you set up criteria that actually would serve the public and contain rates. There's also, as I mentioned, the municipal utilities have much lower rates, and they bill transmission correctly, and they have more flexibility. They are not regulated by the Public Utility Commission. So they have the potential to compensate DERs better. And some of them do. Los Angeles has some innovative programs. They're not perfect. But for all of this, people need to understand it. And people, the public, all of us need to be involved, speak with our neighbors, look enough under the hood to understand some of this, and then advocate with their city council people, with their legislators. Right now, the cost shift is a huge disinformation campaign. So again, I'm not going to give you a silver bullet answer, but there are a lot of creative solutions being explored. Some of the tribal areas have been really innovative in how they're thinking about using microgrids or resilience centers. So there's stuff out there, and it's just the climate crisis and the cost crisis. We really need to move on this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm gonna ask you a question that's a little bit narrow question, but I think it's an interesting one that I want to know the answer to, is that California has effectively shut down community solar programs. And I'm just wondering, you know, how did we get here, and what are other states doing that are really making, which also offer, it's an equity issue for sure. We call it our energy equity campaign. And yet in California, that's really not an option.
Well, it's a tragedy. In fact, you're totally right. Massachusetts, New York, and I think several other states are going full bore on community solar, which is where you have either a large building or a freestanding solar on the distribution grid, where people who live in apartment buildings or can't have solar on their own roof can have a share in the power generated on a larger community installation. And that helps everybody. It helps them save on their bills. Plus, it gets solar, larger amounts of solar put up. So the PUC last year did a fairly astonishing decision where they restricted community solar. They limited it to two complicated and difficult to meet programs rather than opening it up for, and they use this cost shift disinformation as their basis. So that's why we keep returning to that and why I recommend the webinar on the YouTube channel.
Okay, they're just going to make a quick comment here. No, the CCAs are not for profit. They're just, Claire was just including that in the saying the for profits and the CCAs. Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about 350 Bay Area and our energy equity campaign, which is what the campaign that is trying to address all of these issues. So, you know, we're trying to get the word out. We're having these educational series. What we're trying to do is get people skilled up so that they can meet with their legislators. The team is also working on specific clean energy bills that are in Sacramento right now. So we need people to join this team. And the different things that we're working on is that we have an outreach team, a new outreach team. All these teams are new. It's a new campaign. Always need comms and media. We have a letters to the editor team. That is a lot of fun. We've been getting a lot of letters placed, not just about this, but about a lot of everything. And once you kind of get in the scheme, the flow of it, you can pop a letter to the editor out, and you know, it only takes you about 10 minutes because they have such tight little timeline. So we need people to track bills in this area and to meet with legislators and pitch this to people, and not just legislators in Sacramento. And this is also an answer to a question that's in the chat. We are putting together teams at the city level because we would like to pass resolutions at the city level supporting actions, you know, for making our electricity more democratic and more affordable. So our stance is that the social contract that we have made with the for-profit utilities has been broken by the sort of insatiable demand from the for-profit utilities, where they're really more focused on profit. And we have seen that then, you know, to the detriment of safety, even, like, you know, and when a corporation is found guilty of hundreds of you know, manslaughter charges, felonies, and nothing happens, you know, that's a little bit alarming. But also, I like to say that last year there was a bill that got shut down very quickly by these very big moneyed interests to eliminate the ability of the for-profit utilities to charge us ratepayers for their lobbying expenses. And everybody I tell that to that doesn't already know, they're like, that's legal? That's corruption. Yeah, like, and that bill died so fast. It was really sad. So anyway, we would encourage you to sign up as we put this team together. The link is in the chat. It'll probably end up in the chat again by magic. We'll see. And any last questions? We didn't address the hydrogen question that's in the chat because hydrogen is not a good use here. We're very skeptical about hydrogen in general. So here we go. See, magic things happen. If you aren't on our email list, please sign up at 350bayarea.org and 350bayareaaction.org. And if you want to track a bill, drop a note in the chat because we've got 13 bills that look good this year. Some we oppose, and others we. Allie, sold. Anybody else? No, we've got people. We just have to get people organized. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've got 13 bills on in our clean energy action team. We have a number of other bills that we are tracking for the different action teams. So yes, polluters pay bill is definitely on our list. So 350 Bay Area Action, 350 Bay Area Action does an incredible job, you know, tracking these bills and endorsing them and working for them across all levels. So we have, at any given time, we're organizing meetings with our legislators in different districts. So if you want to be on the team, that team, let us know. And as a constituent, your role in the meetings can be as extensive or not as you want. Like just showing up as a constituent for one of these meetings with a legislator is super important. And you can just, you don't have to get your PhD in clean energy technology to participate in any of this. And that's why we're doing these webinars, because there's a difference between starting with zero knowledge and just sort of having things knocking around in your head and slowly chipping it away at even just understanding all of the way too many acronyms that are going on in the space. So, oh, thanks, Hari. Hari has been involved with us for a long time. Well, thank you for coming. And thank you, Claire. Excellent job, as always. Claire and Sam and I meet every Tuesday and get into the weeds. And half the time I'm like, what? But I'm getting there too. So I'm the interpreter, and from the weeds to the not weeds interpreter. Oh, this is a good question that Jack is asking, Claire. What are you thinking about the Golden State Energy Bill and SB 222 introduced by Senator Wahab?
So I think they're both, so the Golden State Power is a process and a group which has worked hard to potentially municipalize, to take over the distribution grid, which is a very ambitious, and the people who are customers of the municipal utilities pay much less in electricity rates than customers of the for-profit utilities. So that's promising. It's a really complex process. So I understand their recent bill now has a study provision where people would look at the pros and cons of different approaches to dealing with the problem with the problems with the for-profit utilities. Senator Wahab is just saying we're going to cap the profits. This would only permit increases in rates at the consumer price index. She's been dynamite in terms of advocating for her constituents. One of the challenges is there can be short-term rate relief, like there's this wonderful income graduated fixed charge, which is now called the base service charge, where it's another basically attack on distributed energy resources. The more the for-profit utilities move their charges into a fixed charge, you can't do demand flexibility. That's a portion of your bill that you're stuck with before you get a single kilowatt hour of energy. And so it sounds on the surface like it's an equity issue that, oh, we're going to charge, the higher income people more, and we're going to give a break to the lower income people. But you can do that in lots of other ways that are important, like community solar, as Laura suggested. You don't want to trade a short-term break, 4 cents a kilowatt hour, but wipe out the potential for savings with DERs. What we're trying to do is get a system which works for all of us and the climate and conservation. We don't want to put solar panels all over the desert. So that's why understanding some of the complexities here and not just accepting this sort of language that, oh, the fixed charge is an equity issue. It's really not an equity issue. If you say, in fact, since we started discussing the fixed charge, the amount that could be saved has been wiped out with the utility cost increases, driven by their spending on transmission and distribution. That's really what we're talking about here. It's, you know, it's a shell game.
Well, I guess to end on an optimistic note, because that's what Claire asked to do. This vision of networked community power is very exciting. And we have everything we need to make that happen technologically. Like the technology is just raced up. Cost for battery storage has raced down. Safety with batteries has increased monumentally. We have everything we need, except there's a lot of misinformation out there and fear mongering, and that is coming from the big moneyed interests. And so that's what we're trying to counter. And I will say I love the vision of like everybody, you know, everything kind of working together in this big networked way, which is way more resilient than what we have going on. I mean, it's been 40 years that the national security people who know what they're talking about know that our centralized and the way our energy delivery systems work is very vulnerable to attack. And this makes it a lot less vulnerable to attack. So that's a little bit of that. But the breaking through this political quagmire is something that activists do, and we're just going to keep at it. And when we were asked to make an endorsement in a congressional race, which was awesome, 350 Bay Area Action was, and when we were talking to the congressional candidates, we asked them about clean energy, and they talked about, you know, this cost shift argument and how rooftop solar is making it expensive for everybody else. And we were able to say, 1 second, let's give you a couple of counter talking points to that, and we'll send you the data to back it up. And now we have people who believe us because we have the data to back it up. So we have the data. That data has only gotten better over time. Do watch the YouTube channel about the cost shift argument. It's really powerful. And, you know, honestly, you have to watch it a couple times to have it really sink in. Sorry about that. We're trying to do bite-sized training so that we don't have to you don't have to sit there and watch a Zoom call, you know, for an hour. But it's worth it. They're really good. Anyway, so that's the optimistic point of view. It took us 11 years to pass the drilling setbacks legislation, and we're still fighting that. We're still making sure that happens. So yeah, we're in it for the next, you know, however long it takes, but it's not going to happen overnight. Every time a piece of legislation gets put up, it gives us the opportunity to go lobby on it. 350 Bay Area Action. We get out there, we talk to people, and that's how we change people's minds. So little plug for 350 Bay Area Action. Do sign up for our emails and join the team, and we do good work. And I'm very impressed with this organization. I am the executive director, but I'm still impressed.
No, you deserve it. And also everybody for giving us your Sunday afternoon. And, you know, I'm sort of a down in the weeds data nerd, but this stuff it's fascinating and it's really important. And I appreciate everybody digging in and then using this information to get us a system that gets us to deal with the climate crisis and the electricity cost crisis. So.
And a round of applause for Claire, who's amazing. Smart, fun. All right, thank you. I'm going to stop recording.